That wasn't his child, he said, loud, sharp, like a door slamming in a quiet hall, and heads turned all down the bright white corridor of North River Hospital. Adam Cole stood in a polished suit that looked like money and power stitched into cloth, fingers stabbing the air, voice hard as glass. "Don't try this on me." On the bed by the window, Hannah Reed, 29, small and tired and brave, held a brand new baby boy to her chest and did not blink. She curled a little around the child like a shield, as if she could fold her own bones over him to keep out the cold. Nurses froze. A guard near the elevator tensed. And the baby, still learning what light means, blinked up under the soft hat the nurse had tugged low after delivery. The door swung wide again and two of Adam's security men hovered just outside, waiting for orders. Hannah kept her eyes on the baby and whispered, "He's mine," like a prayer, like a promise. Adam scoffed, turned away as if leaving would make the whole thing vanish. But then the baby's hat slipped a little, and even from the door you could see those eyes, clear, bright, strange, and it did something to the air like a storm about to break. If you were here right now, what would you say to them? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't miss what happens next, because this is where everything starts to change. Now, let's go back a bit so you understand how we got here. Hannah Reed did not grow up with silver spoons or fancy plans. She grew up with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who fixed things that other people threw away. She learned early how to make a little last. She learned how to keep her head down when people with big cars and bigger names walked by like the whole city was theirs. When she turned 26, she got a job at Colcrest, a glass and stone mansion that looked like a ship parked on a hill, with windows that caught the morning sun and poured it through rooms so wide you could hear your footsteps echo. The house belonged to Adam Cole, the man everybody in the business pages called a genius, a shark, a builder of apps that sat in the hands of millions. People told stories about him. The kid from nothing who turned code into gold, the boss who loved numbers more than names, the smile that came out only for cameras. Hannah learned the halls first. Marble that needed daily care, mirrors that had to be wiped in lines so straight they looked drawn with a ruler, the kitchen where spotless steel lived, the upstairs rooms that smelled like money and lemon polish. She learned the rules next. No sound when the boss is on a call, no eyes on him unless he speaks to you, no questions. She worked with quiet speed and clear hands. And for a long time that was enough. The first time Adam noticed her, it was raining. The kind of rain that turns the city into a blur. A delivery guy dropped the box at the wrong gate, and the paper inside turned to mush. Hannah ran out with a plastic wrap, hair pinned tight, shoes slick on the stone. She saved the box and the papers. When she came back, soaked to the elbows, Adam stepped into the kitchen to get a bottle of water. He saw her wringing out her sleeve in the sink and said, without looking up from his phone, "You didn't need to do that." She said, "It had your name on it," and went back to work. That could have been it, two people like train tracks that run side by side but never meet, but life is not a straight line. There were more small moments. A night the power flicked during a storm and she found the right breaker while the rest of the staff searched with flashlights. A morning when his mother, Ruth Cole, came by with a plant and a pie, the kind of mom who pretends to be soft but sees everything. Ruth asked Hannah to cut the pie, and while she did, Ruth said quietly, "You have kind hands." People forget that matters. Adam came in mid-call, touched his mother's shoulder, kissed the air by her cheek and left again. Hannah watched the door close and thought, he looks tired. The fall that changed everything came late, after a long day and a longer night. The house had hosted a charity dinner. Men in dark suits. Women in bright dresses that moved like the sea. Music. Laughter. Hannah floated on the edges with a tray, quiet and steady, legs aching, mind counting. Glasses to wash, plates to scrape, crumbs to chase. By midnight the guests fell away. By 1 the house was almost clean. In the back hallway near the side door, Hannah slipped on the water a guest had shaken from an umbrella and went down hard. It hurt the way a bell sounds, all at once, all through you. She sat there, teeth tight. Adam crossed the hall at that exact second, jacket off, tie loose, eyes on his phone. He looked up. Stopped. "Are you all right?" he asked, like someone who does not often ask that and wasn't sure how to sound gentle. "I'm fine," she said, trying to stand, and then she wasn't. He put out a hand. She took it. For a second she felt how strong he was and how careful he tried to be. He helped her to a chair in the kitchen, told someone to bring ice, told someone to call the on-site nurse, told someone to grab a clean towel. When the house went quiet again, he poured water into a glass and held it out. "I should have a sign put up," he said. It was meant as a joke. It wasn't a very good one, but it made her smile. He told her to take the next day off. She said she needed the hours. He said they'd pay the hours anyway. She looked down. "Thank you," she said, words small as a coin, and he looked like he wasn't used to being thanked for things that didn't cost money. After that, once in a while he asked, "How's your ankle?" And she said, "Almost back." That could have been all, again. But winter came, and with it a string of late nights where Adam slept on the office couch at home. Screens glowing like moons. Hannah learned his cues. The way he forgot to eat, the way he stood too long at the window with his jaw set, the way his mother's calls went to voicemail when the news was bad. One night, close to Christmas, the house was dim and still. Hannah stood at the sink rinsing one last pot. Adam came in, no jacket, sleeves rolled, eyes gray with work. "Coffee?" he asked, already reaching for a cup. "It's late for coffee," she said. "That's the point," he answered, and his voice was tired but softer than usual. The machine sputtered. He stared at it like it was a problem he couldn't code. Hannah said, "Sit. I'll make it." He did. She poured, added a little sugar. She had watched enough mornings to know what he liked, and slid the cup to him. He took a sip and closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in his face had unclenched. "Thank you," he said, and this time the words landed. He started talking. Not much at first. A deal that wouldn't close. A board member who liked to push. People who cheered when he won and disappeared when he stumbled. He said it without asking for anything, to the air more than to her. She listened the way people listen in churches, with the kind of silence that makes room. He noticed. He kept talking. She told him about bus routes, about saving when prices rose, about her mother's laugh and her father's hands, calloused from fixing neighbors' things for free. It wasn't a fairy tale. Two people in a bright clean kitchen with a midnight clock and a rich man's problems and a maid's life, telling small truths that felt larger than the room. The night the line was crossed, it was snowing. The whole world hushed. He had won the deal. He had also lost something he did not name. He came to the kitchen and found her, and the look in his eyes made the room feel closer. He said, "I'm tired of being a statue people point at." She said, "You're still a person," and meant it. He stepped forward. She could have stepped back. She didn't. It was not a plan. It was a moment. The next morning, the house looked the same, and both of them looked as if they had swallowed the sun and were trying to carry the light without anyone seeing. They didn't touch again. They didn't need to. But weeks pass and bodies keep quiet only for so long. Hannah knew she was late. She bought a test. She stared at the line like a road that went somewhere she did not know. She thought of calling him. She thought of quitting. She went to work and washed glasses that already shone. When she finally told him, she did it in a small staff office with a flickering bulb and a chair that wobbled. She said his name once, soft, "Adam." He looked up. She told him the truth. It should have been a conversation. It became a trial. He paced. He asked dates. He said he had lawyers. He said the word mistake, like it could erase nights and coffee and snow. She stood still, one hand on the back of the wobbly chair to keep from shaking. She did not cry in front of him. He said he'd handle it, and she did not ask what that meant because she already knew. The next day her schedule was cut. 2 days later her locker was emptied into a box. The head housekeeper spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. "I'm sorry. Orders." Hannah carried the box to the bus stop and watched the mansion shrink in the window as the city rose up again, loud and honest. She found a small room with a window that stuck and a radiator that hissed like a snake when it woke. She found a clinic and told a nurse she would do this alone. She found her breath in and out, and the tiny heartbeat that answered from deep inside said, "I'm here." Word travels fast when it pays to talk. Blogs posted blind items. A driver told a cousin who told a neighbor who wrote on a forum that a girl had trapped a rich man. Hannah kept her head down in her appointments. Ruth Cole heard something, no one knows how, and tried calling her son. He didn't pick up. She sent a message, "If there is truth here, do not run from it." He left it on read. Months moved like slow water. Hannah knitted a hat from leftover yarn. She washed tiny second-hand clothes and folded them neat. She worked at a diner until her back begged her to sit, then she took orders from home for small ironing jobs and careful mending. Sometimes at night, she would put her hand on the round of her belly and say, "I'm not afraid," and sometimes she was. When labor came, it came fast. The bus rattled over a pothole and the pain took her breath. A neighbor with a big heart and a small car drove her to North River, talking the whole way so she wouldn't fall into the fear. In the delivery room, Hannah learned what it means to break and not break at the same time. She learned the way a nurse's voice can be a rope you hold onto. She learned that the world can stop and start again in the space of a cry. The baby boy came red and loud and perfect. They wrapped him. They placed him on her chest. His tiny hand opened and closed on air like he was trying to catch the light. She laughed and cried and said, "Hello, Mason," because she'd picked the name one evening when the radiator hissed just so and she liked how strong it sounded. The door opened and closed all night. Nurses, a doctor, a clerk with a clipboard. Then morning came, and with it, the sound of expensive shoes in a cheap hall. Adam arrived like a cold front. He did not look at the baby first. He looked at Hannah like she had lit a match in a room full of paper. He said words that burned. He said he was being used. He said he would test, and until then he would not be made a fool. Hannah did not argue. Not with a man like a wall who had decided a story before reading it. She only turned her body a little more to block his view, because she did not want the first eyes her son met to be full of ice. A nurse stepped in and said, "Firm and calm, sir, lower your voice please." One of his guards said, "We should go." Adam reached for the door frame like he needed the wall to stand. "No," he snapped. "I want to see this child and then I'm done." The nurse looked at Hannah. Hannah nodded once. The nurse touched the edge of the baby's hat and pushed it back. Light from the thin morning window slid over the baby's face. His eyes fluttered open as if the world had called his name. Gray, bright, ringed with a warm brown at the center. A strange, gentle mix that made them look like old stories in new ink. "Ruth Cole has eyes like that," the city would say if the city had been in that room. Adam's grandmother had them in every framed picture in the house. On bad days, Adams looked the same when he stared into a mirror and saw the boy he had been before the suits and the money. The baby blinked again, slow and sure, like he knew exactly where he was. Adam's mouth opened and then closed, because the words he came with did not fit in this room anymore. A memory hit him, his mother's finger under his chin when he was small, saying, "Look at me, sweetheart. I see you," and for the first time since he walked in, he felt something crack behind his ribs. He took one step closer. Another. The guard by the door looked at the floor. The nurse pretended to check a chart. Hannah held Mason steady, heart hammering, eyes on the man who had thrown her out of a life like trash. Adam leaned in, and the baby looked up at him, and in that quiet second you could hear the whole story shift. "No," Adam whispered, not to deny, but because he was arguing with the person he had decided to be. "No, it can't." He reached out an unsteady hand, then stopped as if touching would make it real. Hannah breathed in, braced for the storm she knew and the one she did not. And then a new voice came from the hall. Older, steady, familiar, a voice that always cut through his noise. "Adam." He froze. He knew that voice. He turned his head toward the door, pale under the hospital lights. Hannah's arms tightened. Mason blinked again, the gray-brown eyes catching every bit of morning. The door began to open wider, a careful hand on the knob, and the person stepping in would change everything. The hospital hallway seemed smaller when Ruth Cole stepped inside. She wasn't tall, but something about her presence filled the space, made it heavier and sharper all at once. She carried no purse, no coat on her shoulders despite the bite of February wind outside. She wore a navy sweater, dark slacks, and a gold chain that had belonged to her mother. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned back, every strand neat. But her eyes, those sharp gray-brown eyes that saw too much, were the part of her that always told the truth before her mouth opened. "Adam." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Even the guards at the door straightened like schoolboys who'd been caught whispering in church. Adam turned slowly, like a man in a dream he didn't want to admit was his. His jaw clenched, but his face betrayed him. The color drained from his cheeks. For a second, his hand twitched as if he might fix his tie or reach for his phone. Some meaningless motion to look busy, to avoid what was in front of him. But he froze instead, caught by the weight of her gaze. "Mom," he muttered, his voice half a growl, half a plea. Hannah felt Mason shift lightly against her chest. She pulled him closer, though her arms were already aching from the hours of holding him. She had no armor but her body, and she wrapped herself tighter around her son, eyes darting between Adam and Ruth. Ruth's footsteps clicked on the linoleum as she moved closer to the bed. Each step felt deliberate, chosen. She stopped just short of Hannah's side. For a moment she said nothing. She looked down at the baby, really looked, and in that silence the room seemed to hum. The baby's tiny mouth opened in a soft, wordless yawn. His fingers curled as if reaching for something unseen. And then, without effort, his eyes fluttered open again. They caught Ruth's face with the same strange gravity that had already shaken Adam. Ruth's lips parted just slightly. Her gaze softened, not in weakness but in recognition. It was like a lock clicking into place. She leaned forward, her hand trembling only once before she steadied it on the rail of the hospital bed. "My God," she whispered, though she wasn't talking to anyone in the room. "He has our eyes." Adam flinched as though she'd stabbed him with the words. He turned on her, his voice sharp. No, don't say that. You don't know. I do know. Ruth didn't raise her tone, but it sliced through his denial like glass through fabric. I carried those eyes in my womb. My mother had them. You have them, Adam. And now, she pointed gently toward Mason. He does too. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the distant squeak of wheels down the hall that Hannah's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. 4 months she had braced herself against insults, doubts, whispers, threats. But now, someone else saw it. Someone who wasn't her. Someone Adam couldn't dismiss as desperate or manipulative. Her throat tightened. Adam shook his head, the muscles in his jaw leaping. Coincidence. You want to believe because you... Ruth cut him off with a single word. Enough. It landed like a gavel in a courtroom. Adam's eyes darted to the guards. They dropped their gazes. He turned back to Ruth, fury burning, but underneath it something raw, something closer to fear. Mom, he said, softer now, almost boyish. This isn't what you think. She's a maid. She worked for me. Ruth's eyebrows arched. A maid? And what are you? A man who once swore to me that he would never treat people like disposable tools. Have you forgotten? Adam's shoulders sagged before he caught himself and squared them again. I built all this. I can't just let someone what? Ruth asked, her voice sharper. Exist? Well, bring a child into the world? You think the universe waits for your permission, Adam? He winced. She had always been the one voice he couldn't drown out with money, contracts, or logic. Hannah sat in silence, tears sliding hot down her face though she hadn't meant to let them fall. She hated crying in front of him. Hated giving him that satisfaction. But these weren't the same tears she'd wept alone in her small apartment. These felt different, like something breaking open after being shut too long. Mason fussed, a soft whimper turning into a cry. Ruth, without asking, extended her arms. Hannah hesitated, every muscle tense, but then slowly she let Ruth lift him. The billionaire's mother held Mason with the confidence of someone who had raised babies, rocked them through nights, soothed them through storms. She swayed lightly, humming under her breath. Mason quieted almost instantly, his small head nestling against her collarbone. Adam watched, his throat moving as he swallowed. His mother's humming was a tune from his own childhood, one he hadn't thought about in decades. It wrapped around him like smoke, pulling him back into rooms where he'd been small and safe. Ruth glanced up, her eyes bright with a mixture of wonder and challenge. Look at him, Adam. Really look. Adam's gaze flickered to the baby's face. For the first time he didn't look away. His breath caught. He saw the shape of the nose, the curve of the brow, but most of all, the eyes. Those unexplainable eyes. He knew them like he knew his own reflection. He stepped closer, slow, cautious, like a man crossing ice. Hannah tensed, half expecting him to lash out again, to spew another denial. But he didn't. His hand twitched once at his side as if it wanted to rise, to reach, but he forced it down. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. I didn't what? Ruth pressed, gentle but unyielding. I didn't think, he broke off, staring at the floor. His chest heaved once, a sharp breath. For the first time since he had stormed into the room, Adam Cole looked less like a billionaire untouchable and more like a man who had lost his way. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She'd heard apologies before, ones that came too late, ones that vanished the second doors closed. She wouldn't let herself hope too easily. But Mason stirred in Ruth's arms, and when his eyes flicked open again, they landed directly on Adam. And that was the moment Adam's wall started to crack. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and new life, a strange blend of hospital sterility and the sweetness of a newborn's breath. Ruth Cole rocked Mason gently, her sweater brushing against his tiny cheek. Each soft hum from her lips carried decades of lullabies, of midnight feedings, of promises whispered into the dark. Hannah watched with guarded eyes, torn between relief that the baby was being soothed and fear that her son might be claimed by people who once treated her like she was nothing. Adam stood a few steps away, hands shoved deep into his pockets. His shoulders, usually squared like armor, slumped forward. His gaze flicked to Mason, then away, then back again, each glance like a magnet pulling harder than the last. The fight that had filled his voice minutes earlier was gone, replaced by something quieter, shakier, something he couldn't yet name. Adam, Ruth said softly, not breaking her rhythm as she rocked the child. When you were born, your father wouldn't believe you were his. Not at first. He said you looked too much like me, not enough like him. Do you remember what I told you when you got old enough to ask why? Adam's eyes hardened. That he was wrong. That he was blind, Ruth corrected, her voice steady. Blind to what was in front of him. And you swore, Adam, you swore, you would never be that man. The words hung heavy in the air. Adam pressed his lips together, his jaw working. He remembered that promise. He remembered the nights he'd heard his parents argue, his mother's quiet weeping afterward, the vow he'd whispered to himself in the dark. But vows made in the heart of a boy were too easily buried under the weight of money, power, pride. Hannah shifted on the bed, her arms aching from holding them too tightly across her chest. I don't need him to believe me, she said suddenly, voice trembling but fierce. I don't need his name or his money or his pity. I just need to raise my son in peace. Her words snapped Adam's gaze to her. He'd expected begging, maybe demands, but not that. The defiance in her tone struck something deep, something unfamiliar. She wasn't asking to be rescued, she was daring him to stay away. You think you can do this alone? He shot back, harsher than he meant, because it was easier to hide behind anger than face the storm inside. I know I can, Hannah answered, her chin lifting. I've been doing it since the day you turned your back on me. Since the day you told me I was nothing but a mistake. My son is not a mistake. He's a miracle. Ruth's arms tightened around Mason as though shielding him from the clash of voices. The baby stirred but didn't cry, his breathing soft and even. Adam's throat constricted. For a moment, the echo of his own words, mistake, stabbed him like a knife. He had hurled them at Hannah months ago, certain they'd sever her from his life. But now, staring at the small face that bore his family's eyes, he realized those words had not erased her. They had only carved scars deeper than he could see. The door creaked open slightly and a nurse peeked in. Everything all right here? Yes, Ruth said firmly, her tone making it clear no argument was welcome. The nurse nodded and left, closing the door with a soft click. The quiet that followed was unbearable. Hannah's breaths came quick and shallow, her chest rising like she'd run a marathon. Adam dragged a hand down his face, leaving red streaks across his cheeks. Ruth continued to sway, her gaze steady on her son, waiting as though daring him to keep hiding. Finally, Adam spoke, his voice low, raw. I wanted to believe it wasn't mine. Because if it wasn't, then I could keep being who I am. Keep building, keep winning. No distractions. No weakness. That's what they tell me every day. That's what I built myself to be. Ruth's eyes softened. And what do you see now? Adam looked at Mason again, longer this time. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. Now I see. I see the eyes that stared back at me when I was a boy who had nothing. The eyes I used to see in the mirror before I learned how to pretend. And I don't know how to carry that. Hannah swallowed hard. Her hand trembled as she brushed Mason's empty blanket across her lap, needing something to hold. You don't carry him because it's easy. You carry him because he's yours. And whether you admit it or not, he's already looking for you. The baby stirred again, a soft sigh escaping his lips. Adam's eyes flickered with something dangerously close to breaking. Remorse, longing, fear, all tangled. But just as the silence grew heavy, a phone buzzed in Adam's pocket. He pulled it out reflexively. The screen lit with the name of his company's chairman, the man who had groomed him into a weapon of business, who demanded endless victories. Adam's thumb hovered. Ruth saw the conflict in his eyes and snapped, "Don't you dare." He froze. This child will not wait for your schedule, Adam. He will not pause his heartbeat until your deals are done. You will either face him now or you will lose him forever. And if you lose him, she leaned closer, her gaze burning through him, you will lose me too. Adam's phone buzzed again. Louder. Longer. But he let it fall silent. His hand trembled as he slid it back into his pocket. Hannah's chest tightened at the sight. She had prepared herself for his rejection, for his cruelty, even for his absence. She had not prepared herself for him standing there, torn open in front of her, stripped of the armor he wore so well. Still, she whispered almost to herself, "It's too late." Adam's head snapped up. "What?" Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't falter. "You can't just walk in here after months of silence, after calling me a liar, and expect me to hand over my heart, or my son. You can't undo what you did with one look. You broke something. And I don't know if it can be fixed." The words cut him deeper than any insult ever had. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had faced boardrooms of wolves, critics with pens sharp as knives, enemies who wanted his empire to fall. None of them had ever left him speechless. But Hannah's quiet defiance did. Ruth turned her gaze to her son, her voice steady but final. "Then it's up to you, Adam. Decide who you are. Decide what kind of man you will be. But know this, time doesn't wait. Babies don't wait. And if you keep running, one day you'll look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back. A stranger who traded love for walls of glass. Adam's chest rose and fell. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the rail of the bed, steadying himself like a man caught in a storm. He stared at Mason, then at Hannah, then back again. And then, the door burst open. A tall man in a tailored gray suit strode inside, his expression tight, his jaw like stone. Behind him, 2 more men followed, carrying briefcases and folders. Adam's entire body stiffened. Hannah's breath caught. "Mr. Cole," the man said, his voice smooth but cold. "We need to speak. Now." Adam's eyes narrowed. "Not here." But the man's gaze flicked to the baby in Ruth's arms, lingering for just a second too long. "It seems the situation is already out of hand." Hannah's heart pounded. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew danger when it entered a room. Her arms tightened around the blanket on her lap. Ruth instinctively turned her body, shielding Mason from their gaze. Adam stepped forward, his voice dropping. "You don't speak about this child. Not one word. Not here. Not ever." The man smirked faintly. "That may be difficult, considering the circumstances." He tapped his folder. "There are documents, reports, people talking. The press is circling." Hannah's stomach dropped. Her worst fear was crawling out into the light. Ruth's eyes blazed. "Get out." But the man didn't move. He looked straight at Adam, cold and calculating. "You want to protect your reputation? Your empire? Then handle this. Quickly. Before it destroys you." The baby whimpered, sensing the tension. Ruth rocked him, but her gaze never left the intruders. Adam's fists clenched. He turned his head slightly, his voice low but fierce. "Mom. Hannah. Take Mason. Leave the room." Hannah froze. "What?" "Now," Adam snapped, though his eyes burned with something more than anger. Desperation. Fear. For the first time, Hannah saw a man ready to fight. Not for his company, not for his empire, but for something fragile, something real. She gathered herself, legs trembling as she swung them over the bed. Ruth passed Mason gently back into her arms, her voice low but steady. "Come on, dear." Together they moved toward the door, Hannah clutching Mason tight, Ruth's arm firm around her back. Adam stood tall, blocking the men's path, his shadow falling long across the floor. And behind them, Mason's eyes fluttered open once more, catching a streak of light through the blinds, gray-brown, the same eyes that haunted his father. The door closed behind Hannah and Ruth with a soft click, leaving Adam in the room with the men who carried both his secrets and his ruin. The door clicked and Hannah stood in the hall with Ruth, swaying Mason against her chest while voices rumbled low on the other side, and everything inside her begged to run, to hide, to take a bus that went in the opposite direction of power and money and the trouble that always follows both. But Ruth's hand was firm on her elbow and her whisper was steady. "Breathe, honey. Hold his head. We won't let anyone take him from you." A cart squeaked by, the nurse at the handle gave a kind nod, and time slowed into tiny beats. Mason's warm breath on Hannah's collarbone, the thin hospital blanket rubbing her wrist, the faint hum of a vent above the doorway. Then the voices rose, sharp, clipped, then dropped again, and after a long stretch the door opened. Adam stood there, tie yanked loose, a red flush still fading from his cheekbones. The suited men were gone. He looked smaller without their shadow behind him, and for a second he just stared at the child in Hannah's arms like a person at the edge of a cliff who finally sees how far the drop really is. "They wanted statements," he said, voice rough. "They wanted control. I told them there was nothing to control that mattered more than this." "And?" Ruth asked, not moving an inch. "I fired them," he said, a short breath breaking in his chest. "All 3. The chairman too. He forgot who owns the ground he stands on." Hannah blinked. The thought of men with polished shoes and hard smiles being sent away by one sentence felt impossible and, at the same time, exactly like something Adam Cole could do when he finally chose where to stand. "They won't stay gone," Ruth warned, eyes keen. "Power hates losing its grip." Adam nodded. "They'll go to the press. They'll try to spin it. They'll say I'm being manipulated." He looked at Hannah then, and his voice softened. "They'll drag your name if they can. I won't let it happen." "You let everything happen," Hannah said, not cruelly, just honestly. She had no strength left for anything but truth. "You locked the door from your side and left me outside with Winter. Now you open it because you see a reflection." She shifted Mason higher, his tiny fingers pressing her shirt. "I'm not a reflection, Adam. I'm a person. He is a person." Adam flinched and nodded again, like each word landed with a weight he had to lift. "I asked the hospital to call for a lab. I want a DNA test now. Not because I need it to feel what I feel, he said, glancing at Mason's eyes, but because the world will demand it, and I will not leave you to fight that alone. We'll do it, Hannah said quietly. She had already lived months under doubt. If a swab of a cheek turned the noise into silence, she would welcome it. Within the hour, a tech in a blue jacket came, polite and careful. Swabs, labels, signatures, a chain of custody formed that made Hannah's stomach knot even as she signed it. Proof for a world that had never once asked for proof when it praised a billionaire for breathing. When the tech left with the sealed envelope, Ruth kissed Mason's forehead and said, "Whatever the test says, I know what I see." She turned to her son. "And you know it too." Adam didn't argue. He just drew a shaky breath and asked the question he should have asked months ago, "What do you need?" The words made Hannah's knees go weak, and not in a way that felt like swooning. Need had been a private word for so long that saying it out loud felt risky. She stared at him, searching for the trick, for the angle. "I need to keep my home," she said at last. "I need quiet. I need to heal. I need to buy diapers and not count the pennies after. I need to pick up work that doesn't break my back while I feed him at 2 in the morning." She swallowed, forced herself to keep going. "And I need my name not dragged through the city like trash." Adam nodded once, twice, as if writing each line inside himself. "Done," he said too fast, then stopped and corrected himself, humbler. "I will do the work to make these things true. No announcements, no cameras, no press. Not until the test comes back, and when it does, I'll be the one speaking. You won't have to. You'll want to fix it with money," Hannah said. "Money will help." He didn't blink. "Yes. But money isn't an apology." He lowered his eyes. "I know. An apology is showing up," she said. "When he's screaming and won't sleep. When he's sick and I'm scared. When a headline hurts. When your board looks at you and sees weakness. When your friends say I don't belong. You show up then." Something shifted in his face, and she saw the man who had wavered in her kitchen, tired and human, before he remembered the performance the world required. He nodded again. "I will show up," he said, not loud, not performative, just steady. "If you'll let me." The nurse returned to check vitals, a perfect shield for a moment that needed one. Numbers, notes, a soft grin at Mason's slow, milk-drunk blink. As afternoon pulled its pale light through the blinds, Ruth slipped home to gather a few things. Soft blankets, a knit cap she said had waited too long in a drawer for a baby to fill it. She also stopped by Cold Crest, where staff stared and scattered, unsure how to move when the weather changed without warning. She told the head housekeeper to leave Hannah's final pay and benefits at the front desk for pickup. Not in a box but in an envelope with respect inside, and then she walked into Adam's office, stood in the center of the rug and said to his legal team, "If even one rumor touches that girl's name from inside this house, I will sell the furniture out from under you and donate the money to the clinic that delivered your consciences." By evening, hospital security had moved Hannah to a quieter postpartum room. Adam stayed in the chair by the window, useless and trying not to be. He Googled how to swaddle correctly, failed twice, and finally learned from a night nurse who laughed kindly and said, "You're all thumbs, sir, but we can work with thumbs." When Mason fussed, Adam stood and swayed, shocked to realize that his body knew how to rock even if his mind didn't. He watched the infant eyes blink up at him, the same gray-brown he'd tried not to see for years in his own mirror, and felt something unnameable move through him, heavy and full and right. He put the phone face down, the screen still lit with messages stacking. Reporters, board members, friends, all of them asking for a version of him he didn't want to be. He ignored them and changed a diaper badly. He wiped the tiny face too gently, corrected by the nurse who said, "It's okay to touch. He's sturdier than he looks." He sat when the room went blue with late light, and in the chair's squeak he heard his childhood kitchen, his mother's radio, the tick of a clock that had never once kept time with the stock market. Morning arrived with results. The lab director came in person to avoid leaks, his face careful, his envelope thick. He asked to speak privately, but Ruth, back at the bedside, said, "We are a family in this room," and the man swallowed and nodded. He broke the seal, read the page, cleared his throat. "Probability of paternity," he said, voice small in a big moment, "is greater than 99.99%. There are words your ears don't process right away because your heart is sprinting to catch them." Hannah felt the room tilt and then settle as the sentence sank through her skin. She closed her eyes, not for vindication, but for relief so deep it made her bones hum. Adam folded at the shoulders, a quiet, unpretty motion like a tower lowering itself to ground so it wouldn't throw a shadow on what mattered. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," he said, "not the public kind, not the polished kind, just the kind a person says when he has to tear up a map and promise to learn the roads by walking. Hannah, I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I let my fear talk like it was wisdom. I hurt you. I left you alone. I should have been here, there, everywhere you needed. Hannah looked at him for a long time. Sorry is a seed. It grows if watered. There are things you can't repair with words, she said, even as her voice softened. But you can build new things with actions. Start there. He nodded, and Ruth, who had held her breath through the whole reading, finally exhaled. Good. Now the world. The world came fast. A blogger posted a rumor with a photo of Adam in the hospital corridor cropped like a smear. A rival investor retweeted a joke. A cable host started a segment about billionaire baby drama before lunch. Adam didn't ask for permission to be different. He simply was. He called a press conference not at the mansion, not on a stage with a logo, but on the sidewalk outside the hospital with the wind slapping his tie and the city loud around him. He stepped to the microphones and said, I owe 2 apologies, one to the woman I hurt and one to my son. I will make both with my life, not my voice. He told the cameras to leave Hannah alone, named no details beyond what the test proved, made it clear that anyone who harassed her would meet more than a cease and desist. He took 2 questions and left. He went back upstairs where the real work was. Over the next weeks, work looked like things no one could put in a headline. It looked like paperwork at the family court to ensure custody and support and protection were written in ink, not wishes. It looked like a new apartment for Hannah in a quiet building 3 blocks from a park, leased in her name, paid in full for a year without strings attached, with a new crib that smelled like pine and the exact rocking chair she'd pointed at in a catalog and then shut the page because the price felt like an insult to reality. It looked like an apology at the diner where Hannah had once stood on aching feet for tips small as dimes. The manager stunned as Adam provided a letter clearing her of any rumor that had cost her shifts. It looked like Sunday afternoons when Ruth brought soup and stories and let Hannah sleep while Adam learned to hold his son without hovering like he might shatter. It looked like midnight texts that read, "He won't stop crying, what do I do?" followed by a photo of Mason finally asleep on Adam's chest, both of them sweaty and victorious. It looked like firing the fixer who whispered about NDAs and hiring a women-led legal team that listened before they spoke. It looked like quietly rehiring 2 staffers at Coldcrest who had refused to spread gossip and giving them raises because integrity should not be a volunteer position. It looked like meetings where Adam told his board, "Family is not a weakness," and when someone snorted he said, "Then you misunderstand strength," and he meant it enough to weather the dip in the stock a pundit called the cost of feelings. It looked like guardrails Hannah insisted on. No photos of the baby in public, no using Mason's name for a brand, no showing up without asking. And Adam agreeing because love that needs to own is not love at all. Trust does not arrive on a train, it walks on sore feet. Spring came measured by bottles and burps and doctor visits and the first smile that wasn't gas, Hannah laughing so hard she cried, Adam's mouth falling open like he'd never seen joy perform such a simple trick. One warm evening they took Mason in a stroller to the park. No one recognized them at first because they looked like every tired new pair who had learned that the world shrinks in the best way when a tiny person holds your day in both hands. They sat on a bench near a tree that had just remembered how to be green. Hannah told him about the night she heard the radiator hiss and chose the name Mason because it sounded like a builder, like someone who stacks one stone on another until something strong exists. Adam listened with his head turned the way you hold your ear to the ocean. "I thought I was building towers," he said, "but I was just stacking mirrors. This," he nodded toward the stroller, "this is something I can lean on." They didn't talk about love. Not yet. Love is not a reward for surviving a storm. It is the roof you build slowly so the next storm finds you covered. But there was a softness in how they said each other's names now, a gentleness in the pauses that hadn't lived there before. One evening, Ruth brought an old photo, her mother holding Adam as a baby, those same eyes bright under a knitted cap. She placed it next to a new photo of Mason yawning. "Time repeats until you learn the lesson," she said, not unkindly. "I'm grateful it didn't take another generation." Summer arrived on fast feet, the air fat with heat and the sound of sprinklers. A story that had banged pots in the city for weeks finally tired of its own noise and slipped into the ordinary miracle of a family making morning coffee and finding burp cloths and couch cushions. On a quiet Saturday, Adam carried Mason up the stairs of the small apartment while Hannah unlocked the door with one hand, balancing a bag of groceries with the other. Inside, the room smelled like baby lotion and sunlight on cotton. Adam laid Mason in the crib, stood there too long just watching the tiny chest rise and fall, and then turned to Hannah with a careful breath. "You told me to show up," he said. "I will keep showing up." Not because I have to, but because I get to. She studied him, the lines near his eyes softer than winter, and for the first time she let a small smile out without tugging it back. Then show up tomorrow, she said, teasing but not. There's a diaper pail that needs your battle plan. He laughed, the good kind, surprised and easy, and in that laugh she heard how a life might sound if everyone told the truth and tried again. That night, after Ruth left and the city softened its voice, Mason woke with a cry that wasn't the usual hungry fuss. It was sharp and worried, it climbed the walls. Hannah scooped him up, checked him, too warm. Panic beat its drum. Before the fear could turn wild, Adam was at her side with a cool cloth and his phone open to the pediatric nurse hotline, listening, nodding, fetching the thermometer. They counted breaths, checked the numbers, held him between them like a precious ember they refused to let go out. The fever ebbed with midnight. Hannah's shoulders dropped a fraction. "Thank you," she whispered into the dark. The two most ordinary words turned sacred because of when they're said. "Always," Adam answered, and in the quiet that followed, something old and sharp in the room finally set itself down. Months later, autumn stretched over the park like a warm coat. The leaves let go with grace. On a bench underneath a maple, Hannah held Mason on her lap and watched him reach for a red leaf like it was a flag meant just for him. Adam sat beside them, one arm on the back of the bench, not quite touching her shoulders, near enough that the air knew. "I used to think eyes were for making other people flinch," he said softly, looking at their son. "A warning, a dare. Now I think they're for telling the truth and hearing it back." Hannah nodded. "He'll grow up seeing you watch him. And he'll see me watch you," Adam said, steady, a promise that didn't need music behind it. She let that sit, not claiming it too fast but not pushing it away. Ruth appeared a few minutes later with a bag of cookies and a grin that carried 3 generations. They sat together without performance, the kind of family that builds itself by showing up on ordinary days. Hannah leaned her head back and let the sun find her face. She remembered the cold corridor at North River and the voice that said, "That baby ain't mine." It sounded small now, like a person shouting from a far room with the door closed. She kissed Mason's hair and smiled at the life that had walked here one deliberate step at a time. In the stroller basket, a single swaddling blanket peeked out, washed thin with love. The wind shifted, and for a second the park smelled like lemon polish and warm coffee and rain, like all the rooms where this story began and all the rooms where it would keep going. Late-night feedings, first steps, first words, fights that teach you how to stay, apologies that know how to be work. The baby's eyes lifted to the light, gray-brown and certain. He reached toward Adam's face and patted his cheek with surprising accuracy, and Adam laughed like a boy who had just learned a secret because he had. This wasn't an ending, it was where the story decided to live. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to this channel to support our growth, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Your city might get a shout out in the next episode.